video is brought to you by Squarespace. So I finally finished Arcane. I know, like 3 months late. I was watching it with some people, so we had to get all of us in the same location to be able to finish it. It was a whole thing. But like every artist in the world right now, I'm also very obsessed. The art styles of Arcane and Spider-Verse have had an absolute death grip on me for years now. I mean, it's just so scrumptious, so delicious. I want to eat it every single day of my life. But I think my obsession with the Arcane art style, production, everything has reached an all-time high, especially with all the challenges going on, especially with the first show officially ending. But in particular, I have seen people on Instagram either draw themselves in Arcane's art style or make like an Arcane OC. And I want to do both of those things, but I'm trying to make it palatable for like a whole video. Those are relatively simple art tasks to do, so I thought it would be fun for a video to combine those concepts and make a silly little self-insert Arcane OC just for fun. And I also want to take this as an opportunity to study and observe the Arcane art style a little bit, see what aspects of it I want to take and pull into my own, analyze and pay a little bit more attention to some of the design sensibilities of the style and the production overall. So in this video, I want to do an indulgent self-insert character design inspired by Arcane, and then do a fully rendered piece of that character, kind of studying the Arcane art style. I've already made a Pinterest board of my character with a lot of concept art and inspiration of the outfit and overall styling and everything, so let's hop over there and see what ingredients we're cooking with. So short disclaimer before we begin the boards, in case it is not already abundantly clear, I do not play League, I do not desire to play League, I have too much respect for, you know, like my sanity. So getting into the board, already here I have like a couple of color palettes that I want to play around with, which like regrettably, very Noxus already off the bat. It's just my color palette in general is like black, red, gold, white, sometimes silver. I'm not intending to create a Noxus character in this video. We're not even really going for a character that's going to necessarily fit in the world in any kind of meaningful way. This is a self-insert, like who cares? But I very much still want to come up with my own kind of aesthetic for this character while pulling, you know, themes and things that I consistently see within the character designs in Arcane already. So there's definitely like lacing going on in these kinds of X shapes. You see that, of course, a lot in Jinx's design. I feel like these kinds of silhouettes are very popular, like a good boot. I've got a lot of like my general whimsy gothic fashion inspiration on here because I feel like it does play fairly well with a lot of the Art Deco aesthetics that are influencing Piltover. So a lot of graphic shapes and intricate patterns and things like that. We love a good belt. So obviously like a lot of steampunk influences going on in Piltover, and there's a lot of streetwear influences going on in Zon. So I'm also kind of trying to pull that like modernity blending with like more early 20th century kind of historical influences in there. I have a lot of references of the actual character designs from the show. Just turnarounds to see like, can I find any repeating patterns, or like, you know, what's the design identity of the show whenever they were coming up with some of these. One thing that will not be present in my designs are these stripes. It's not for me. I also have some like weapon designs on here because I want to create like a cool sort of hex techy weapon for my self-insert character, just because I think it would be fun, because they've only played with a few different weapon styles on the show so far from what we've seen. Again, I'm sure there's so many more in actual League. I don't know, we're having fun today, okay? We're having fun today. First, if you're also someone who is making overly complicated reference sheets of your characters, maybe you need a portfolio gallery to show them off like the ones that you can create with this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Setting up a portfolio or website is made simple with their professionally designed, flexible website templates that you can either use as is or customize with your choice of text, colors, website graphics, and custom pages. Recently, I've been finally getting around to making reference sheets of some of my characters, and I've also created a couple of pieces that I'm just proud of in general, and I can easily add those to my existing portfolio gallery just by selecting the pieces from my computer, ordering them how I like, and Squarespace's automatic image scaling will do the arranging for me, so it's always easy to keep my gallery updated with my latest work. But if I want to show off my characters or art pieces in even more detail, I can create dedicated portfolio galleries detailing a particular piece or project, like the dedicated character profiles I am slowly building up. These are great because I can really customize the visuals, I can add text and details, so eventually, hopefully, my audience will be able to just go on my site and learn about my characters whenever they want to. It's like a custom wiki for my characters, but I don't have to deal with making a wiki, which I've done before. It's it's a pain. But if your focus is less on individual projects and more on selling your artwork, Squarespace also has an e-commerce platform where you can easily sell your artwork and goods directly to your customers alongside your main site. Their platform really offers every selling tool you could possibly need, from shipping labels, point of sale inventory for convention sellers, to flexible payment options like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, and ClearPay to accommodate even more buyers. But if you're on the busier side like me, you can create your prints and products through Squarespace's custom merch, and their print-on-demand partner will handle inventory, production, and shipping for you. So if you're an artist who wants to begin sharing your work with a portfolio this year, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/pricklyalpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks as always to Squarespace for sponsoring. Now let's get back to it.
So first up, let's get working on the character design itself. So I generally had a loose idea of what I wanted to go for with the outfit and general accessories, because this is based on me, shameless self-insert, so I have a pretty good idea of how I like to dress and things that I like to wear, but the challenge was trying to convert that into Arcane style and make it look like something that would exist within this universe. Of course, my inspo board was a huge help with this. I was pinning a lot of outfits and character designs from the Arcane show itself, and I wanted to basically look through and see repeating patterns and shapes and clothing motifs throughout a lot of the different designs. That way I kind of could use that language to maybe come up with something on my own for my particular character. As I mentioned in the inspo board section, I'm not going for like a particular location for this character. Like I said, a lot of the things on my boards did feel a little Noxian, just because that's the kind of style I tend to gravitate towards in the first place, but that's kind of not what I'm going for. Kind of going for a blend of all of the different kind of character designs and styles that we see in the show, put into my own style, that sort of thing. So one of the things I noticed in the character designs from the show was the heavy use of like repeating shapes and geometric themes among the characters. I found this super cool breakdown of Vi and Jinx, and highlighting like the V's and X's in their character designs that are kind of repeating motifs that I thought were super cool. I also think it's fun that you can kind of even carry over that X motif in Jinx's design to her braids itself. Like, it's very intentional, pleasing design. It's something else you see a lot with Mel's kind of golden Art Deco shapes, just how square every single inch of Jace is. Echo's design obviously has his repeating hourglass and clock face as a motif. So for my character, as kind of a repeating visual symbol and motif, I wanted to do kind of a four-sided star, or the sparkle shape that I repeatedly use in my artwork. It's a very popular shape for just graphic design art in general, but it's something that I've used repeatedly over and over again. I have pieces of jewelry with this star shape in real life. I thought that this general diamond triangular motif would work well for the type of character I wanted to create, so it's something that I really tried to carry throughout the design. I also think this particular shape is fun because while the sharpness of it makes it pretty active, if you look at the negative space of the shape, the corners are kind of rounded, like three circles cutting into the star shape, so it also includes like curved rounded shape language, and I think those two are a pretty good amalgamation of my personality. And I think it also represents a lot of the shapes and recurring design that comprises my art style in general. Something else about Arcane is that everyone sort of has their signature hairstyle. I think that hair has a lot to do with like the personality and the expression of the characters, so I also wanted to give my character a very iconic kind of quirky hairstyle. And since I'm really fond of putting my hair in these sort of bun/Sailor Moon braids whenever I wear armor and things like that, I decided that would be a fun hairstyle for this character to have. Once again, kind of circular, kind of spiky. The braids themselves can take on a bit of a diamond shape whenever you draw them that way. Even though long pigtail braids are already very jinxy, I still thought this would be a fun direction for the character design. So since I wanted to do several different outfit variations, I kind of just began on a slightly more casual version of the outfit. That way I could take the line art from that and use it to build off of for the other versions of the design. So the first outfit that I decided to work on, I wanted to be like a little bit more practical, more casual, maybe use it to brainstorm a general base style the character could have, and then build off from there and make some more complicated outfits. If I had to assign any kind of role in the universe of this character, I think that she would be kind of like bounty hunter, pirate-esque. Nothing too intertwined with any general plot, just a girly trying to make some money with some work for hire. So that's kind of the vibe I was going for with this first outfit, something that would be easy to move around in, something with like kind of dark colors, so if she was like stealing something for someone, she would blend into her environment a little bit, but also something that's cool and sort of stylized, and of course incorporates way too many belts, because Arcane is also one of those shows that follows the golden rule of like, just add some belts. If a design is boring, add a couple of belts, it'll be fine. I love my gothy harnesses in real life, so it's also pretty much a fitting fashion choice for me personally. For the clothing style itself, a lot of the clothing in Piltover feels very steampunk with kind of Victorian and even some mid-century influences. It's very interesting how some of the outfits look, especially some of the uniforms of the enforcers. Those can look a little wild, honestly, and sometimes I'm not entirely sure why there's just random poofs in places. Like, hello, what's going on with the random poofs? Of course, Zon is a lot more practical. There's more casual, slightly more modern looking clothing, a lot of streetwear, but there's still like a little bit of that historical influence there where things feel a little steampunky. Like Silco could be an alternate universe Peaky Blinder if he just put a little hat on. So the general outfit formula that I ended up using for this character is like sleeveless turtleneck that's a bit of a tunic, some kind of laced pants, and then thigh-high boots. On the first casual design, I made the tunic a little bit more of a waistcoat and I gave it some coattails. I also ended up cutting it at her natural waist in the front to give it more of a crop top effect, because that's a garment that I wear all the time in real life. And then I also gave her a boob window with lots of lacing, because anime, that's really the only explanation that I have for you, but I also definitely would wear this. I love a plunging neckline, I love a dramatic V-neck moment, and I also love, you guessed it, too many belts. I did finish off that design by experimenting with belts and harnesses just to add a little bit more visual interest and make it feel more chaotic, because a lot of the designs from Zon have that like suspenders, excessive belts quality to it. Like Jinx has it, Vi has it, I'm pretty sure Echo's got something going on there too. I don't know, that's my excuse for the harness and belts. For the second outfit that I'm working on here, which I very much think would be the main outfit that this character would have that you would see her in, I wanted to keep it kind of close in terms of silhouette and general outfit composition to the more casual version, make it a little bit more complicated, a little bit more iconic, more on theme. And one of the ways that I wanted to do that was by adding a big old trench coat type leather jacket, which has actually become one of my personal winter staples. I have several of these, and I just seem to keep acquiring long black leather jackets. I don't know, I love them. So the other thing that I wanted this to accomplish was give her more of like a triangular pointed silhouette, once again playing into the shape language and shape motif that I'm trying to give her. And very much in line with that, I also wanted to add a bunch of like spiked rivets to the jacket and this general design. So like I said, the foundation of the design is very similar to the casual version, but in this version I wanted to give her a bit more of a battle dress situation. I wanted it to have a long skirt because I am also very much a long skirt girly, but I want it also to be something she can run in, fight in, that sort of thing. So I basically did a red sleeveless turtleneck dress with, once again, a boob window, very similar cut as the casual version, but just did very long slits up the sides. And then I did some shorts underneath that with, once again, lacing going up the sides of those just to carry over that motif and that shape. And also, it's kind of sexy, it's kind of edgy, I like it. And I paired that once again with very similar thigh-high boots, some studded fingerless gloves, because of course. And then I also added a corset on top of the dress with like some steampunk inspired design filigree on it, because I also love wearing corsets. It's not something I see too often in the designs in Arcane, but I feel like it could conceivably exist within this universe because it feels very steampunk. Then finally for the jacket, I added spiked rivets all over the shoulders. I didn't want it to feel too modern, so I also gave it a popped collar and some patches on the elbows. And then finally, I also wanted to highlight the back of this design, both with the jacket on and with the jacket off. So with the jacket on, I added some different kind of Art Deco, arcane-y looking designs to the back just to give it a little bit more detail. I also added a laced back just to carry over that theme throughout the character design. And then I also did a version of the character without the jacket on to show the back of her dress and the general outfit in a little bit more detail. And during the coloring phase, I added even more detail to the dress, a lot of gold patterns similar to the ones on the jacket. I kind of wanted it to feel reminiscent of some of the Art Deco, Art Nouveau things happening in Piltover. This was also a little bit inspired by Mel because I think that her character design is just really, really cool. I love all of the use of gold in it. And speaking of gold, whenever I was finishing up some of the coloring, I also started giving a fair amount of thought to what kind of weapons I wanted this character to have. I was very much looking for something that felt like it fit within the world of Arcane, but something that I hadn't exactly seen in the universe already. And one of the cool things I saw whenever I was searching around Pinterest was a kunai looking knife that had a chain on it, and then that chain connected to a bracelet or a gauntlet. That way you could basically yank the kunai back. Not a practical weapon, but I thought it looked cool. I liked the shapes that were going on, and it also reminded me of the weapon that Mbessa used in the finale of Arcane, so there is sort of precedent for that kind of weapon in the world. And I was thinking, especially if that weapon used hex tech to make it make a little bit more sense. So instead of being a kunai that's just governed by the basic laws of gravity, I was thinking the hex tech would allow you to have some kind of control over the magnetism or polarity of the weapon. Maybe the little gauntlet would even allow the kunai to have more of a neural link with the user that could like control where it went and the intention of it, almost like a Doc Ock tentacles situation. It's kind of a silly idea, but I thought it would also be kind of cool. And in the reference sheet illustration, I was also playing around a lot with the idea that this character keeps like the kunai kind of stashed in her hair buns whenever she's not using them. Again, kind of a silly idea, not super practical. You could really like hurt yourself realistically, but it's just an idea that felt very anime to me, very like unserious, quirky villain. So I thought that I would keep it because that's kind of the energy I'm going for this character. Maybe a little anti-hero, a little villainous even. To finish up the character design, I wanted to do one more slightly casual outfit. I'm not sure exactly what she would wear this for, or maybe more of a training workout outfit, maybe something to wear more casually like around her home, but I wanted to do something without all of the gear, without weapons. So for this one, I wanted my character to have her hair down. Once again, I wanted her to have some classic thigh-high boots on, but this time something that's a little bit more like dressy, so they have a slightly more impractical heel on them. And then I just wanted to design a cool little jumpsuit bodysuit for her. This is mostly because I found some really cool looking floral harnesses on Pinterest, and I wanted to kind of use that idea to make an outfit that's like not lingerie. So again, the bodysuit uses the same general silhouette as the other outfits, sleeveless turtleneck with boob window, and then I kind of just went crazy coming up with cool shapes and designs to go over the bodysuit. Once again, using that same red and gold color palette, and I really like how this one came out. I think it's cool. I don't know exactly what occasion she would wear it for, but I just wanted to kind of have a go at it because it was a fun idea. Of course, near the end here, I had to do a little Arcane self-portrait headshot of my character. Facial structure is kind of based on my face, but then kind of just based on a lot of different faces in Arcane. It's not too complicated or super well structural or thought out. I just wanted to have fun for it. And finally, I also did kind of a close-up illustration of the Hextech kunai that I had an idea for, but that didn't feel quite substantial enough for my character to carry around in terms of weapons. If she's a bounty hunter, I figured she would need something a little bit more threatening, and I've always really had a thing for characters that just dual wield cool swords. So I also gave her some cool dual wielding Hextech swords. I don't think the technology is as sophisticated as the kunai. I think basically if you stab someone, you can also give them like a little Hextech electric shock, and that's basically the extent of how they work. But I still think it was fun to build and design them using shapes that I used throughout the rest of the character design, and it also gives me some fun weapon combinations to play around with whenever I move on to doing the actual full illustrations. Also, if you have the Arcane bug and you have not done a self-insert Arcane OC yet, what are you doing? You should. It's really, really fun. So at this point, we've got a pretty decent character design down, but now I want to do some full illustrations trying to steal certain aspects of the Arcane art style and basically just use it as an excuse to study and practice some of the things I've observed and want just a little bit more mileage in. So first I want to do some kind of more dynamic, action-oriented pose because I love the framing and composition and energy of all of the fight scenes in Arcane. I love the gestures and dynamic angles that they use. By extension, I also really love all of the splash art that you see of League characters. All of the posing is super dynamic and fluid. I love the use of colors and value, and that's something that I also want to study and bring into this art session a little bit. Finally, I want to just do a straight up headshot focusing on the face. The facial structure and expressions and rendering in Arcane is one of the biggest things that artists have latched onto, and I'm absolutely no exception to that. So I also want to see if I can study all of those things in one headshot illustration using my character. So first I'm going to work on an illustration with a dynamic camera angle and pose. So to start exploring my options for that, congratulate me, I actually did quite a few thumbnails to try to figure out what I wanted to do with this illustration. 6 to be exact, which is maybe not as many as some would do, but it's pretty good amount for me. I don't usually do this many thumbnails. Here I was really trying to explore different action poses using the kunai and the swords as kind of framing devices within the composition. I was trying low angles, high angles, just anything to push it out of my usual range of action poses. I was trying to do a lot of perspective, which is also something that I'm very much trying to work on this year. It's not something that I'm good at or really have my head wrapped around at all. And then for a couple of these, I also used some references of poses like from Pinterest and things like that. I probably should have used reference a little bit more on these, especially for some of the ones that were in perspective, but I was really just trying to capture energy with these thumbnails. I also went back in the end and roughed in general values that would guide the eye and kind of the lighting plan for the whole illustration. That's something else that I should be doing a lot more often, and I'm still getting used to it, but I was pretty happy with these in the end. So since I only really had time to fully render one of them, I went over to Patreon and put it up for a vote for my patrons to decide which one I was going to finish and render. And unsurprisingly, they voted for number 1, which was also probably my favorite at the beginning. I just like the fact that it's mostly full body, it's pretty dynamic, I like the kind of swirly circular thing. By order of the patrons, I took illustration number 1 and I started working on it and cleaning it up and trying to make the technical perspective of the sketch read better and be more correct. Trying to add a little bit more detail and flow and dynamicism, and the head especially was giving me some problems as to what was correct, and that was sort of clashing with what I thought looked good. And long story short, I quickly realized that this was a little above my pay grade at this point in terms of perspective. I was just not wrapping my head around this pose right now. I think I need a little bit more study before I try to tackle something like this. So naturally, instead of number 1, I decided to tackle number 3. Okay, I get it. I'm sorry. It's not exactly what you guys voted for, but I did want to try some kind of an extreme perspective with this one, and I felt more confident about the ants eye view. So moving on to illustration number 3, this is the one that I ended up adapting into the full illustration project for this video, and it kicked my butt as much as the first option probably would have. The difference here, however, is that I was actually able to take reference of this pose because the other one's in midair. So I started out by tweaking and refining the sketch a little bit now that I was actually working from reference, trying to make sure the foreshortening and perspective going on was as good as I can make it at the time. This is definitely one of my first illustrations ever using this kind of an extreme perspective, so I was very much out of my comfort zone the entire time I was working on this illustration, and I was especially out of my comfort zone whenever it came to the head angle. I was struggling with this the entire time, and it definitely shows whenever I'm working on the rough sketch at the beginning. But I did want to just proceed and see what I could do with it, so I continued to inking, and I was trying to do this with like relatively smaller brush strokes compared to how I usually work, but I don't know if I exactly managed to do that. I don't know what it is about me and my art style. Some of it I know is probably just dexterity. Like, I'm still not wonderful at drawing from my shoulder instead of my wrist. I just struggle to make thin line art like ever, and that's kind of an issue with my art style. It's something that I've been trying to change challenge because I do end up kind of focusing a lot more on painting and rendering in the back end of things. So the line weight and the sort of look of the line art isn't that important to my art process overall. It's kind of just a step that I use to organize the process. If anyone has tips for achieving thinner, finer line art, especially inspired by like manga, anime type stuff, that would be much appreciated because I still struggle to know what I'm doing. But the inks followed my usual process for the most part. I did flip my canvas constantly because I was really worried about my drawing skewing, especially since it's in a perspective I'm not used to. I was also really trying to make sure the face wasn't looking weird whenever I flipped the canvas. But from there, I added flat colors based on the character design that I had already made. And then my general concept for this illustration is that she's in like maybe a back alley, maybe somewhere in Zaun, given like the rough architecture that I added into the illustration already, sort of looming over one of her victims, maybe trying to extort money from someone, I'm not exactly sure. But I wanted it to have very moody lighting and pull a lot from the lighting color palette of the Undercity. So once I had a general background idea roughed in, and I also added a couple of multiply layers in order to kind of test out the values and make sure the lighting was in the direction that I wanted it to be in, I started in on the shading process, which I wanted to use a slightly different process than I normally use for this particular illustration. I've been watching a lot of Mark Burnett's YouTube videos lately, and I really wanted to try out a shading method inspired by the one he uses that sort of shades characters the way 3D character models are shaded. It just gives the pieces a lot of depth and sort of like that ambient occlusion effect in like the hard to reach light places. And I thought that particular formula might be nice for characters that are supposed to look a little bit more CG. The way I did this was just by painting in all of the shadows in black on a multiply layer. And for this process, I used the airbrush a lot. And then I also used just the round watercolor brush and of course the blend tool. I also made sure to add just a flat white layer underneath this multiply layer so I wasn't getting too distracted by the actual colors and tones going on in the clothing. I purely wanted to focus on shadows here like you would on a 3D model. And I have to say, although this process is not super different from how I usually shade, it was a ton of fun. I loved using the airbrush as much as I did. I love the way this method gives a lot of dimension to the limbs and any surface that sort of has a curve to it. And I love just how much detail is going on. I mean, I'm a maximalist. I love making my paintings super detailed and just have a lot of eye candy going on. I think the shading method is really good at achieving a more dimensional effect for your characters. So I'll also link the tutorial where I found this in the description if anyone else is interested in playing around with this shading method. Once I was done with the basic shading, I of course moved on to roughing in the background a little bit more. Again, I'm going for an alley in Zaun, so I pulled up a lot of reference images and concept art of a lot of the architecture in Zaun, and I kind of tried to mimic that in my own personal style without making it too crazy detailed. I also love a lot of the window styles that are going on. There's a lot of stained glass happening. There's a lot of green lighting inside shops and stuff like that. So to make my alley look a little bit more interesting, I also made some of my own colorful stained glass windows and put them in some of the buildings. I also added a lot of arches and power lines and infrastructure kind of spanning across the alley, since this is sort of like a bottom-up perspective on everything. And trying to keep everything in perspective with this background was also a huge challenge. I kind of just winged it. I probably should have like drawn it out and had more of a grid going on, but I think it works fine for an illustration like this. But the other difficult part about doing this background and just this illustration in general was trying to manage my values and my use of color. I love everything in my artwork to be super vibrant, super colorful, but whenever everything's colorful, that can be a little bit like harsh on the viewer's eye. It makes it harder to use color to like guide your viewer's eye. And my values can often be like a little bit muddy and sort of confusing as well. That's a big piece of feedback that I've gotten on past work, and it's something that I've been trying to work on right now. So during the process of working on this, I was trying to check my values constantly and make sure that the alley still felt dark while not overwhelming the values of the main character. I was also trying to introduce little pops of color here and there just to make the alley seem more interesting and add some cool lighting, while again trying not to make those too saturated saturated and overwhelming. I also ended up adding a lot of colorful haze and mist around my character because that not only fits well with the actual setting that I'm working with, but it also made the values like tone down a little bit and made my character stand out more as a focal point. Moving into the final lighting phase, forgive me, there is a little bit of a jump in my recording. It kind of jumps from not having any lighting on my character to all of a sudden having like a bunch of blue and everything, and that was my fault. But the overall goal at the end was to really make my character pop by adding a bunch of blue light from the hex tech. And for this whole illustration, I was kind of trying to go for a split complementary color palette with red, green, and blue. There's obviously some other tones happening in the background, but those are sort of the main saturated tones that I wanted to stand out. And obviously I'm trying to use blue the most in the foreground here. The blue light here is definitely very exaggerated, but I wanted that to really stand out and separate my character from the background and kind of be the focal color for the whole illustration. There's so much use of cool lighting like this in Arcane, so I was really trying to capture that as much as possible while also kind of trying to remain true to my own style. So I finished this by just painting it up, kind of trying to color in my line art to make it blend in, paint over it in places that I thought were like too obvious, where I was trying to go for more of that 3D look. I also tried to paint the hair as much as I could because that's something else that's pretty prominent in Arcane's art style. I painted the metals, metallics or something else that stands out a lot. And I also tried to use light in a motivated way where there is a light source in the environment somewhere where the light is coming from, but an artistic way where you're basically using the light in the way that just looks best as a piece of artwork. That seems like it was a big part of the philosophy for making Arcane look as good as it did. Even if something wasn't fully technically correct, if it's what made for the best looking image, that's what the animators went with. And following with that same philosophy, at the end I also added a lot of like bloom and glow effects and particle effects. I added even more swooshy particle effects to the hex tech, even though I don't think it technically would ever glow that much. It looks cool, so that's what I went with. And at the end of this illustration, you can still see that I'm struggling with the angle of the face and head, and I don't think the jawline looks correct at all. It's fine, it's not terrible, it just bothers me a little bit. But that's okay, because we're about to do an illustration that focuses on the face. So for the final one, I of course wanted to go with a headshot because I really wanted to just have some fun and play around with some of the way Arcane styles, expressions, and faces, and especially these close-up expression shots. There's so many of these that play in slow-mo in Arcane, and they're just the coolest thing. I also really love that Arcane doesn't stray away from kind of putting their characters into what would kind of be considered ugly expressions, especially the female characters. Whenever they emote, they emote, and you can see it plainly on their face. It looks realistic and human, and despite that, none of the appeal is lost from the character design or model because everything is so well beautifully modeled and lit. It's wonderful. That kind of expression is something that I want to capture much better in my artwork. So for this illustration, I wanted to do more of an extreme expression. My character kind of yelling and screaming in the middle of battle. So I grabbed a reference image off of Pinterest, and this is the type of expression that I ended up going with. I wanted this to kind of be a dramatic mid-battle scream, so since I did a pose with her kunai for the first illustration, this time I decided to have a pose focused on her sword. That way I also get to kind of practice painting hand gesture and that sort of thing. And in this pose I also wanted to put a big emphasis on like the flow of her hair. That way it gives it a lot of movement, so I also used her braids as a framing device, and that's the other reason why I gave this character braids in the first place. That's something that the animators seem to have had so much fun with Jinx in the actual series. It's just a cool thing to play around with in terms of movement. Even though I'm not actually animating this piece, I can still utilize that. My process on this piece was pretty similar to the process I used in the first illustration. I went from here to just inks, trying to refine everything, once again really struggling to keep my line art thin out of the way. It's still way too prominent for my liking, but that's okay. From there, I did flat colors, and during this phase, I brought in a little bit of the detail that Arcane characters seem to have on their actual character models, like some of the texture painting that's going on the skin and the hair and that sort of thing. I do struggle with this stage of how they do the character models because some of it is so very subtle. For this stage, I just used, I think, the round watercolor brush, but having some more textured brushes might have helped me a little bit more more with this stage. I also used a lot of like pinky peachy tones because my particular skin tone has a lot of like red undertones to it, but it may have also been helpful for the sake of contrast and texture to use more like yellows and blues here and there. I don't know, something that I'm gonna play around with a little bit more in the future, but I do really like this method of adding some texture to a character's face. It's something that I've already tended to do with my art style to begin with. I really like adding a little bit of rendering at this stage before I go in and like shade everything, but I'm probably gonna bring like a little bit more of this technique into my art style. For the light source in this piece, I once again wanted to use the hex tech in the blade as sort of the lighting my character, and I also wanted to play around more with like a cool color palette combination. So this one I was pretty much going for a very classic film look, that's sort of like cyan orange or almost like a blue red sort of dynamic. So more of a bluish foreground and then the background having those like reds and oranges. So with the little Hextech crystal as the light source for my character, I went in with the same shading method that I used on the first piece. This time trying to refine things a little bit more since I had more of a detailed kind of illustration to work with. You can tell I was really going for a 3D look with this shading. I was using the airbrush a lot. I was trying to capture as much of that ambient occlusion as I possibly could because I feel like that makes shading like this look really realistic and grounded. And while I was doing all of this, I was once again trying to keep my values in check for this piece. With a piece like this where it's a close-up on the character's face, I really want to make sure that it gets across that's the focal point, that's what the viewer is supposed to be looking at. I don't want things like distracting from that. So once I got the detail shading layer done, I used a couple of different multiply layers and some gradient maps and some various blend modes to try to incorporate some of that red background light into my character. It was just kind of generally trying to play around with a good combination for what's going to show enough of my character's expression, ground her in the scene, and also guide the viewer's eye with the values that I was using. This took some trial and error and adjustments, and I was once again constantly using a grayscale color layer to check my values and make sure everything was still looking good. But eventually I settled on that like red-orange background with more of a bluish tint to my character. And much like the shading techniques that are said to be Arcane's secret sauce, I used just a multiply shading layer to emphasize the values around my character and sort of like vignette the face and the hair in darkness so that the expression really stands out. I think adding that blue multiply layer around the hair was really effective for making my character's silhouette stand out against the background while still keeping the face nice and bright. After adding a few little Hextech wisps to the background to detail everything a little bit more, I then went in and began painting my character. Whenever I paint a character like this, I usually begin by painting on separate layers underneath the line art, and then eventually I will go on towards the end and begin painting the character on top of the line art. And this is basically just to give me degrees of edits that I can make and give me as much creative control as I can possibly need. I paint over most of my illustrations as a final step because not only do I like the painterly look, it's just nice, but whenever it comes to blend modes and colors and things like that, sometimes it kind of gets you close to what you're wanting, but it's not exactly perfect. So like I said, by painting over it, you get a lot more control over exactly what everything looks like. It's easier to blend things and add paint textures and just, I don't know, it's a technique that I highly recommend if you are kind of queasy about the idea of painting overall, but you still like that painterly look at the end of your illustrations. I take this time to add a lot more detail to the lighting of everything, a lot more life to the skin, a lot of reflections and little textures, and kind of paint in what the surfaces should look like. So adding little details to hair, adding reflections to metallic surfaces, adding subsurface scattering and little details to skin. I spent a long time painting the hair at this stage because there's a decent amount of detail in some of the hair in Arcane, especially if you get like a closer shot. And I also spent a lot of time on like the intensity of the rim light. Rim light is another big thing that is used in Arcane all the time because it just makes like a silhouette pop. It makes everything very appealing and feel very dimensional. So I tried to add a lot of like bright red rim lighting to the top and back of my character to kind of solidify her in that red environment while having plenty of blue lighting on her from the Hextech itself. I also did remember that in my illustration, the Hextech orb is visible from both sides of the sword, so I also gave her lighting on the bottom of the sword, which I think improved the overall color use in the illustration, so that was nice. And I also added a lot of glow and bounce light and skin reflections and just fun rendering things. This is was really a piece that I could keep rendering even longer than I worked on it, but I had to call it quits eventually. I played around with a couple of different digital effects like noise and sharpening and moving the like RGB layers around to do a 3D effect. A lot of those visual digital effects are used in Arcane a lot, especially in relation to the hex tech glitching, so I thought that would be fun to incorporate. And then at the very end of the illustration, I decided I hated the way the nose and parts of the face look, so I decided to paint over a bunch of it. Hey, what can I say? Drawing realistic noses at weird angles like this is still a big struggle for me, and at the end of the illustration I was like, hey, this looks nothing like my character and frankly also looks nothing like me. So I did what I should have done in the first place, and I took a reference photo of myself in this pose, and I painted over what I had to have a more realistic nose and mouth shape that was a little bit closer to my personal facial structure. It was really difficult to get this right. I did a lot of canvas flipping along the way, and honestly in the end I'm still not super happy with it. The nose bridge is very ridiculously short whenever you take more than 2 seconds to look at it. The mouth is also probably way too big. Like, I really should not have given my character such anime proportions. It's not necessarily what I'm even used to working in, but in the end I added a bunch more particle effects to the hex tech and messed around with some lightning, and I at least really like the way the rendering turned out in this piece, even though the expression and the facial proportions are not perfect. And I especially am pretty dang proud of the hair. Hello, and welcome to the end of the video. I know that this was probably a longer one, and it's kind of like a weird amalgamation of me doing silly little character design and also trying to work out some full illustrations, but I hope that you had a good time anyways. This week I mostly wanted to mess around and practice some full illustrations using some of the influences that I really enjoy about Arcane. It's something that I'm going to continue to try to study in future videos. I've been like a lot more into doing full illustrations recently because it's just something that I took a break from for a long time in favor of doing a lot of character design, so I want to like continue to hone my skills with that and develop my style of doing full illustrations, especially in terms of doing larger scale stuff. And I will be doing another Drawing Your OCs video very soon. Once again, pulling from that same initial batch that I did, so no new submissions are open this time, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But I'm very much looking forward to trying to apply some of the techniques I learned in this video to some of your characters and really having like a fun time coming up with some cool illustrations, so definitely be on the lookout for that. I have another character design video cooking as well. But once again, thank you so much for watching! What did you think of Arcane Season 2? I've heard that it's been a little bit divisive, so you should tell me what you thought in the comments. That would be very nice. But as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single video I make goes to my patrons, and especially my executive producers. I would never turn any of you into a hive mind in the pursuit of perfection. You guys are perfect just the way you are. Koichucks, Becca, Mandolin, Cyrus Orion, Ghost Got Ghosted, Jenny Craftsma, Optimus Prime, I Do TKD, Ren, Band Off the Yellow, Cloud Max, Marietta Wasner, Velly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Holding Space for Me That Espresso, Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Call Me Ash, Blaze Ravenscar, Lunira, Mossy Raven, What Do You Call a King That's 12 Inches Tall? I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Icecavan, Awendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Breeza, Brian, Phoenix, P&G Not Found, Freedom and Gus Gus, Cat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.